We continue reading. The author demonstrates that whenever people say they believe in God, they are really telling us that they have certain psychological and social needs that they do not know how to meet. Lindsay then provides more productive avenues of discussion and action. Once non-believers understand this simple point and drop the very label of atheist, will they be able to change the way we all think about, talk about, and act upon the troublesome notion called God?
So, as we read Lindsay, it becomes clear the author has decided to adopt a questionable approach, in a book where he would presumably have to first demonstrate, or establish his thesis, namely, that ideas about God are incorrect. Lindsay instead establishes his thesis, by presupposing that the argument is already over, that he is right, and in the words of the title of the book, everybody else is wrong about God. He argues that it is a moral wrong to engage with believers, in much the same way that it might be wrong for adults to engage with children about concepts their less mature minds cannot handle. Bavinck seems to have predicted this approach with his analysis over 100 years ago.
Now, even though we disagree with Lindsay's thesis, there are aspects of what he proposes that are good. First, he makes a great point: why dialogue with folks who, like Lindsay, do not want the conversation? After all, Christians and non-believers have interacted throughout the entire Enlightenment period. This is meant in the best sense. Once a person has been introduced to the gospel, if they reject it, knowing and understanding its doctrines, what more is the Christian to do?
Further, it is worth noting that Christians have had meaningful discussions, and have contributed to healthy dialogue, interacting with the thoughts and philosophy of thinkers like Kant, Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and others. It seems that Christians have held up their end of the bargain, and have interacted in good faith, providing reasonable criticisms, as well as accepting reasonable insights. Of course, it's not clear that the courtesy has been returned, for who among the secular brights has learned anything beneficial or edifying in their study of religion? This asymmetry is an important point, and the reasons why Christians can learn from non-believers, but non-believers have nothing to learn from Christians, is an important point to examine.
But, if there are some positives in what the author says, there are some senses in which his recommendations are quite chilling. His motion represents the end of free speech as a core democratic value, for one thing. Lindsay is riding the wave of a cancel culture that implements an extrajudicial court of public opinion, using ostracism as a method of public policy. He's not alone in this thought. There seems to be a concerted effort, from many secularists, to aggressively pursue a cancerous strategy of removing Christianity from all aspects of society, from corporate life, from government, from education, from entertainment, and so on.
This appears to be a form of intellectual hypergamy, with non-believers perceiving that Christians have nothing meaningful to offer in discussions, and indeed, Christianity is painted as being no better than an intellectual form of racism, an evil to be avoided, rather than merely being a different school of ideological thought.
But what is intellectual hypergamy? It is an anthropological condition. One way to describe it humorously is the way in which Garrison Keillor jokingly referred to the buoyant, optimistic pride of the citizens of his fictitious Lake Wobegon community. As he jokingly puts it, "That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the children are above average." This tribal evaluation is the result of pride in the human condition. The proud person finds it offensive that they should be asked to learn something from an inferior. This concept is referenced in the old adage, "Familiarity breeds contempt."
It reminds me of a time during my university days. As I moved towards completing the requirements for my degree, I would consider that the classes I completed represented my degree of mastery in understanding the material. I was marking as done subjects like linear algebra, thinking that because I had completed a one-semester course, I had learned everything that mattered about that subject, and would not need to revisit it in the future. Later, with more maturity, I realized that my one semester was not a completion, or mastery, of the subject, but rather, just an initial introduction to what was a larger field of knowledge.
Why should this be? It seems that human beings sometimes mistake the will to dominate for the will to understand. Has author Lindsay made the same mistake here? Has his presupposition that religion is nothing more than an immature way of thinking blinded him to a deeper reality? And so, we are back to considering that the narrative is less about engaging in the marketplace of ideas or providing scientific proof of his thesis, and is instead more about advancing a particular pejorative narrative, a storyline Christians are intellectual children and not to be engaged with.
One interesting clue is to consider how many secularists in this vein characterize the transition from the earlier childish belief in religious ideas to the more mature and adult state of critical thinking, skepticism, and autonomy. Frequently, the transition is referred to in very positive fashions. Becoming an atheist is often described as a step toward freedom, as leaving a theistic condition that was little better than a form of bondage or slavery. Non-believers sometimes described their conversion to atheism as being born again. This form of anti-religion smells suspiciously religious.
Think about the mode, or method used, though. Imagine a debate between two persons, atheist Andy, and Christian Kyle. Andy takes the stage, and declares, "The debate has already occurred, and Christian Kyle has already lost." Who would think that was a legitimate form of debate? Certainly Kyle would have an obvious objection. Another thing to note is the overuse of science and overstatement regarding what has been proved scientifically. Also, appeals to authority, that is, an appeal to a consensus of selected non-believing thinkers, in an attempt to build moral persuasiveness, is used, along with partisan appeals that sell a product that claims, critical thinkers are on our side, while blind sheep are on the other side. How are these methods scientific?
Is our author really fighting the good fight to advance science? Or is his treatment merely one more, in a long line of partisan overstatements, that Herman Bavinck anticipated many years ago? Take a look at some of these headlines. Science says, this is what being near the ocean actually does to your brain. Do you want to fall in love with your partner all over again? Science says to ask these simple questions. Science says that regularly attending concerts makes you happier. And then my favorite meme. Why? Because science says so, that's why. The good name of science is brought low by partisan ideologues who either don't know or don't care to distinguish between true scientific inquiry versus selling an ideological narrative.
So, in conclusion, we asked ourselves, is our author interacting in good faith? Or has he fallen into the same disreputable arrogance, and hubris, and intellectual hypergamy, that other Enlightenment thinkers have displayed? Kant, and Nietzsche, come to mind. Kant claimed that no one had done metaphysics before him, while Nietzsche said that he was the first person to think about, and create, the science of psychology. And now our author has followed in their footsteps. Everyone is wrong. No one has thought clearly on this topic before our author. Does this sound like reputable science to you? We stand with Herman Bavinck on this one.